Welcome back, everyone, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. I'm a little under the weather today, and that's not stopping me from recording this episode. I have been eager to be able to interview our guest, Parker Wilson, here for quite some time. And so while I may sound nasally, I assure you there's a reason for the urgency, because I just think everything that Parker has endured over the last several years and her story today is just that important to be told. So Parker, so great to meet you via, face to face. I feel like I already know you so well, but I'm so grateful for you joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor, truly.
So it's kind of a funny backstory here. I've been introduced to Parker through a mutual friend who's also a colleague of Parker's. And through the process of her and her family and really her village of supporters using Support Now, I've learned a great deal about Parker. And so there's all these kind of personal, I would call it personal backstories here that I'm connecting with. She lives in Wilmington, North Carolina, where my family came from, or from where my dad is from, and her late husband, who we'll speak about here in a second, went to high school where my cousins went to high school. So I feel already so connected to Parker, which hopefully will create just a deeper discussion today. Parker, not to kind of take too many words out of your mouth as it relates to kind of everything that you've been through, but I'd love for you to share with our listeners kind of what brought you to this point and a little bit more about Thomas.
I would love to share. I'm hanging on to one of his favorite shirts to kind of keep my feet steady while we chat, and I'm grateful for the chance to share about my person. I had the privilege of meeting you and your team through Support Now because 2.5 years ago in December of 2022, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and you also have probably gotten a great dose of our village through that and seeing some of the things that were listed and all of the different pieces and people who've been reaching out via Support Now. He went through a pretty extensive journey and transparently went through one that we didn't think would end the way that it did. We can speak to that as we kind of move through the conversation. But our life has certainly been made up of a lot of valleys. And I actually had a friend, a very dear friend, who's also a widow, share today that the deep valleys and grief, the risk of pain is worth it when you can experience a love that fierce. And to hang on to that truth as we're kind of walking through hard things. But suffice to say, I'm approaching 41, which is hard to believe, and met Thomas when I had just turned 22. So I spent nearly half my life with him, and that was not nearly enough time. We have 3 fantastic wildlings, we call them, the Wilson crew. We have a daughter who is 8 and twin boys who are 5. They are the end result of what I thought would probably be one of our hardest valleys, which was 4 years of infertility and surgeries and doctor's appointments and everything in between. And so I think to kind of walk through that together, and then our boys were only 2.5 when Thomas was diagnosed. So we've really experienced sort of, plus the boys were actually born the month before lockdown during the pandemic. So it's been an interesting 5 years, Jordan.
Yeah, you've been through the ringer, to say the least.
A little bit.
Just for a little bit more backstory, talk to me about how you met Thomas.
I am not sure if any listeners are familiar with the movie Mean Girls, but there is a part of the movie where I think it's Regina George is walking at like the front of the pyramid. I mean, she is fierce and has a presence about her. That was Thomas walking in front of a pyramid of men at the parking lot attached to the Carolina Inn at a Wake Forest UNC football game tailgate. Any friends who are listening already know that we bleed so much light blue, and that's enough said there. It's a tight tie. He actually proposed at the Old Well, of course.
Of course. I love it.
Always we're, through and through. So we met at a football game tailgate, and I am in sales, and in true sales form, I stalked him. He was with a group of guys. I had just moved to Raleigh. I'd accepted a job there, was living in Texas after undergrad, and did not want to move to North Carolina. When I grew up in North Carolina, when I left, I had no intention of coming back. And my parents gave me a stack of football tickets because they felt really bad for me because I was very upset about being there. So I just took a ton of friends, and one particular individual may have thought we were on a date, but I had explained we were not on a date. So I waited for him to go grab some barbecue and texted my roommate, and I said, I just saw the man I'm going to marry. I'm going to go introduce myself, and walked right up to him, stuck my hand out. He had a firm handshake that nearly broke my hand. We started talking. I learned where he worked, a little bit more about him, and he started to pull out his Motorola StarTAC back in the day, flip phone, to get my number. And the person I was with came back and he put his arm around my back and like pulled me in. I was like, no, 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 no. We're not on a date. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, Thomas grew up with this person, and as a high integrity, chivalrous North Carolinian, put his phone back in his pocket, and I saw my whole future disappear before my very eyes. So the next morning, I called my sister and I said, all I know is he works for Ernst& Young. I need to call the office and you need to write the speech. My sister at the time was a speechwriter for a US senator, and she wrote the speech. And Monday
Oh my
morning, I
gosh.
dialed 411. I knew he was out of town for work. So I asked for Ernst& Young, Thomas Wilson's desk, and I read the speech. And he called.
Oh my gosh. What an amazing story. And was the rest history? Like, that was it?
That was it. He called on a Wednesday. I will never forget it. I was getting ready to go out to dinner, and my roommate and I had nicknamed him McCountant because it was back in the days when Grey's Anatomy came out and there was McDreamy, and Thomas was an accountant. And I
Yeah.
screamed from the bathroom, Kristen, McCountant called, McCountant called. And we went out. So that we met on October 28th. He called back that Wednesday or Thursday, I think, and we went out that weekend, and that was that.
Wow. Wow. Man, I love that for so many reasons. And to your point about being a salesperson, I mean, if that's not a testament to how you can close, I mean, a future employer has to hear that and say, man, I want her. I want her.
He's the best deal I ever closed by far.
I I love it. I love it. So Parker, talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned earlier there was already some things that you all struggled with as a couple. But talk a little bit more about the early signs that maybe something was wrong with his health and then how you discovered that he did in fact have cancer.
Thomas's cancer journey is really, I think, well, I shouldn't say that. Everyone's cancer journey is really unique. And I think what I learned is that very few people's cancer journey is linear. His was actually presenting as a small mass that we saw directly where he actually had a benign mass removed maybe 5 or 6 years prior to when this one showed up. I'll never forget it. We went on, my parents had gifted us an anniversary trip to this beautiful hotel in Virginia. And we went for the weekend. And at that point, we didn't notice anything. There was like a small red mark on his back, but nothing alarming because what he'd had removed before we'd been told could come back. And it was really small right at the top of his spine. And so at first, we thought it might be a muscular knot, something that he was very, despite working all the time, he loved his job and he loved his team and he was good at what he did. He became really involved in hot yoga and strength training and had done a lot to really, we ate clean, organic, all the things, especially going through infertility. A lot of our health journey changed in that process. And so I don't think either one of us thought anything of it outside of being potentially a muscular issue because it was so visible. And he'd been doing new workouts that could have like popped something out of whack, so to speak. He went to a dermatologist. The dermatologist at that time actually wouldn't touch it. It grew really, really quickly. And by November, he went to another physician in Wilmington who did a biopsy, and they shared with us that the biopsy was inconclusive and they wanted to send it off to Duke, which also came back inconclusive. By this point, my sister's worked in healthcare for the last, I can't even remember how long, 14 years now. We've gone through a myriad of things as a family, with extended family, navigating health issues. I knew that something was not lining up in the story. So I
And
went,
sorry, Parker, sorry to interrupt.
no,
Was he showing any other symptoms? Like,
none.
was he tired? Was it like coughing? Nothing.
Nothing. At that point, the cancer was isolated to just that mass. The type of cancer that he ultimately was diagnosed with after a year and a half of trying to figure out the diagnosis, mind you, it was a feat, or a year, I should say, maybe. He was diagnosed with a pediatric sarcoma called rhabdomyosarcoma. His particular genetic fusion is extremely rare. I learned recently that at least of tested cases, his fusion was TFSP2, I think. I can't remember the exact for it. I think I've probably blocked it out, to be honest. There are no known survivors of his particular type of rhabdo. I'm really thankful I didn't know that as we were walking through the journey. I think it's really, really common I've done it, to look up prognosis. I had people I'd never met who, when I would share my story, their first question was, well, he'll be fine, right? What's the prognosis? And I was like, okay,
Mm.
you seem more afraid than I do. I think we're always trying to figure out what the future's going to hold and kind of dress rehearsing for tragedy and prepping ourselves. So we really tried to stay grounded in the present. But what was interesting about his case is that so many tests came back inconclusive. I finally went with him to the doctor because at this point, again, I thought it was nothing. I kept working. We were moving through life. And we sat down at Wilmington Health. This amazing nurse practitioner handed us a piece of paper with the final pathology. And all I saw were the words spindle cell. And I knew what that meant. And we got to the elevator. And he looked at me and he said, aren't you glad you came? Did you learn anything new? Very sarcastic. And I looked at him and said, I'm very glad I came. Did you hear what she said? And he said, yeah, it's fine. I'm just going to have it removed like I did the other one. And I said, no, honey, she said it's cancerous. And he stops. He goes stark white. We get to the car and he just bursts into tears. Mind you, Thomas was not a highly emotional person. I took that cake and the whole bakery. And so we're driving back home and he stops to get green juices, smoothies, all the things. And we walk in and he just starts pounding every raw vegetable and fruit that he can find and said, I guess it's time for me to prepare for chemo so I can get through this. I mean, the minute he knew, he was bound and determined. And that never changed up until the minute that he was gone. So it was an interesting journey because the tumor was excised in January of 2023. At first, it was diagnosed as inflammatory myofibroastic tumor, which has a 95% survival rate and is treated with surgery and radiation only. He had the surgery, I will say, was pretty brutal, and he had a wound vac for 3 weeks, then had a skin graft, and the skin graft just would not heal for months.
Wow.
That was probably main indication number one, that there was more to the puzzle than everything that we were seeing. And I think looking back now, there ultimately were a few health systems that didn't exactly nail it in the beginning. And that's largely because his type was so rare. Once we ultimately ended up doing consults with Sloan, Dana-Farber, MD Anderson, Cleveland Clinic, UNC, and Duke. And Sloan had never seen his type. MD Anderson, I think, had only seen one. Duke had not seen it. And Duke has an entire sarcoma center. So it just, I think any cancer specifically that's rare, one thing I would share is sort of like a learning. Second opinions always. And you don't have to wait to have a quote unquote extreme cancer or a really out of control case to go to what we call the big systems like a Dana-Farber, MD Anderson. We ultimately found incredible care across MD Anderson, Cleveland Clinic, and UNC. That was and really dialed into Cleveland Clinic and UNC. They were our collective team. And I learned so much about integrating systems and working across different health practitioners. So I'll pause there because I could go down that rabbit hole for a
Yeah,
very.
no. So a couple things I wanna touch on. One is, I think there is a common misunderstanding that when people get a cancer diagnosis, that they know right away what stage and what type. And I've heard this before, both on this podcast and in separate conversations. I'm always amazed at the journey that families have to go through to better understand what the diagnosis is. And it sounds like Thomas and yourself kind of fell into this category of, it's not good, but you still don't quite know what it is. And therefore, it becomes really challenging to begin to create a treatment plan. Mm-hmm. So, like, how many weeks or months in between kind of that first, you talked about the nurse practitioner that you saw in Wilmington that gave you that indication that it was cancerous to, okay, now we know what this is, now we can plan. How many days or weeks or months did it take before you got that clarity?
We learned in December of 2022 that it was malignant. That was confirmed in pathology in January of 2023.
Okay.
I changed his bandages every day for that full year. And the Friday before our daughter started kindergarten, was it kindergarten or first grade? Now I'm blanking out. No, she had started kindergarten before. So this was the Friday before she started first grade. I saw another mass 1 inch over to the left of where the other one was removed. Now, mind you, we'd been told that IMT had a 75% recurrence rate. I was alarmed, but like, okay, this is coming back 6 months after the surgery. This is way
Right.
faster than what I thought. He moved into radiation immediately, and we did another pathology, and it was confirmed as rhabdo in November. So that's 11 months from
Wow.
time of first pathology. Now, it's worth mentioning here because I think this is really, really, really important. In the grief journey, I think it's very, especially with a prolonged illness. For me, it has been very tempting to look in the rear view and say, what if this? What if we'd known from day one? What if we'd not done surgery first and done something else? I am incredibly grateful for the doctors we had who were super honest with us from the word go. They did not mince words when this was diagnosed as rhabdo. That said, we still pursued every option, including clinical trials. The rhabdo chemo protocol is 42 straight weeks every week. It is one of the longest chemo regimens I've ever heard of. And when I look back at the work that Thomas did and the choices that he made and what he went through, I can share pieces of, we almost lost him in March of 2024 to sepsis, to a chemo-induced infection. He was given a 0.5% chance to survive that, and he woke up. So to me, there's like a lot of miracles throughout this story. We call that year the bonus year after. But suffice to say, we did do all protocols for rhabdo, and at one point last year had so much hope that he was going to land in the category of remission. The chemo was effective in the beginning. MD Anderson did a phenomenal job with his surgery in May. They got everything, and all indications, and at that point it still was isolated only to muscular tissue, subcutaneous right on his back. So there was no spread anywhere else. There was a small spot that I kept asking his physician about before his surgery. And I was told that is scar tissue and it's nothing you need to worry about. I asked for 2 more weeks. We lived in Houston for a month. And she said, would it make you feel better if I biopsied this before you guys travel home? And I said, yes, it would. She took a dime size bump off of his skin graft and it turned out to be rhabdo again. So we still, that was a gut punch for sure. But I think we still were in this space of, okay, we know that chemo's been effective. We switched chemo treatment plans. And then we started setting up these dominoes of clinical trials and everything else. That story I could share for hours. And I do want to make it really, really clear that I personally believe that my purpose at this point is to support families who are walking this journey, because our path had so many pivots and I don't regret a single one of them. I remember sitting in Boston. I love Dana-Farber. That team's amazing. And the doctor looked at me and said, what do you consider your role in this process? And I said, great question. My job is to turn over every rock until there are no more rocks to turn over. I found trials in Beijing. I talked to the NIH. I found a trial in London. If there was something to touch rhabdo, I was on a phone call with a doctor to see if Thomas qualified. He did a lot of that work as well. He actually came from clinical trial. He came from the CRO space. This was his world. I mean, he was never afraid of a clinical trial because that's what he did for a living.
Right.
So I think it's, I had a friend ask me one time, how long do you stay at a health system before you switch? And I said, that's not the question to ask. The question is, which doctor is thinking about your case at 11 o'clock at night and can't go to bed until he or she reads one more paper and finds one more nugget of information? That's the team we ultimately landed on. And at the end of Thomas's journey, I had a physician at hospice tell me that she was shocked by Thomas's life. Rhabdo, on average, takes people in 9 months, and he lived 2.5 years. And I think it is a full illustration. I mean, we called him Iron Man for a reason. He was relentless. And we also had a team that was relentless on his behalf.
Yeah, the team led by Captain Parker here. One of the things I don't want to get lost in all of this is that you also have 3 children that you're navigating. How did you manage the logistics? How did you manage the emotions of it all? How did you talk to your children about it? I know that's a very loaded question, but as you're describing all these things, I'm like envisioning someone that's staying up late at night, like not turning off their computer, not turning off their phone, to your point, turning over every stone. But then at the same time, you have 3 very young children that have needs, both physical and emotional, that have to be met. So how did you do that, Parker?
I look back and so many pieces of it feel blurry. We are really, really fortunate to have an unbelievable, we call it the chosen family in Wilmington. I'm not sure how we got that fortunate. We are also next to UNCW, which has a stack of amazing, amazing college age women who were just so beyond willing to pour into our kids, like people who just stepped in and just the best babysitting crew ever. But truthfully, it was a lot of spreadsheets and it was project management of life. And that said, to your point, there are emotional elements to this that I was not at all prepared for. And I'm still sitting in that. I took my son to his first counseling appointment yesterday. My daughter has 2 this week, and our other twin has his first one on Thursday. Point being that it's been a little bit of a moving target in some ways as we figure out. I told someone recently that to me, grief does not necessarily have a playbook. Parts of motherhood, I think, do. And Thomas created that foundation for us. There was no one who longed to be a dad more than my husband. We were on the dance floor at our wedding and he asked, when can we have kids? And I was like, not now because I'm not ready. Yeah. He was our daughter's favorite person in the entire world. Their bond was, I still can't believe she spoke at his service. Their bond was unbreakable and still is. And our boys, goodness me, they worshiped the ground he walked on. And I think their journey is going to be really interesting because more than likely their core memories will be of him sick. Yeah. Because he was very visibly ill in the last year and the chemo regimen was taxing to say the least. That said, he still picked them up from school every day. He only stopped driving maybe 6 weeks before he passed.
Wow.
He tried to walk every day when he could. I mean, he did as much as he could to look and feel present for them. Mm-hmm. With our kids navigating the last couple of years, we were also really fortunate to have family within a 2 to 2.5 hour driving distance. So we had grandparent support. My sister is incredibly involved in the lives of our kids. And, we really did build Team Thomas is what we called it. He had his uncle very frequently drove him to chemo. His mom would come in and stay with the kids overnight. It was an all hands on deck effort while he was sick. And the goal was really to create as much joy in the midst of grief as we could. Our daughter started therapy about a year ago when he was really, really sick last March. And she's been given so many tools in her toolkit. She's also like a mini 50-year-old. I don't understand it. She is wise beyond her years and is holding me up right now. I think the other piece that was really important for us is that we were brutally honest with them. I think it's important to say that that was a personal family decision. I know of several families who had relapses of cancer and chose to maintain life as normal. And I have tremendous respect and full compassion for that decision. I think families need to make the choices based on their children, their tendencies, their personalities, their struggles, their wins. And for us, we found it very clear that the more we sort of sheltered them from, the bigger the narratives and stories in their head. And we took our daughter to Cleveland for a weekend to see the hospital. We took her to Houston to see the hospital and have the weekend with Daddy before his big surgery. We took our boys to UNC, which was an easy one because my sister works there and it was very easy this is Aunt Lala's office, and they, really, it seemed less scary to them. So we talked to them about what to expect with daddy being on medicine. They called him baby penguin when he lost his hair. There were a lot of pieces of it where there was humor and joy mixed in the heartache. We instilled a lot of consistency of things that we loved. We have dance parties every night before bed with very bright disco lights. And we just kept as much simplicity as we could in the midst of a raging storm.
And Parker, how did you, and I guess this is more of continuation, how did you process your emotions? Were you talking to therapists? Did you start any medication? Like, again, you're shouldering a lot, right? You're managing everybody, including yourself. And I find that caregivers oftentimes put themselves last, both mentally and emotionally and physically. So, were there things that you tried to do to keep yourself grounded and safe?
That's a good question. I've actually struggled with this recently, wondering. I've had a lot of temptation of regret because I think one big piece for me was very tempting to disassociate from what I was witnessing. It was easy to pour myself into work. I kept working through all of this, and still, I actually don't know where I'd be without my team. They really helped me out, and I'll get to that too. But yeah, it was easy to be distracted because it's indescribable to watch the person who you love more than anyone in the world, who no one has ever seen me the way that he does. No one ever will. And no one gave me the space to take up more room than he did. He really was the person with the hand on the small of the back, guiding you into a room to just glow. And he loved to watch his children bring joy and light up the world. And he just wanted to create more space for all of us to live big and love hard. And to watch that person decline and hurt and fight and be afraid and be courageous, sometimes all of that in one day, it is too much for any human to endure, truly. So for me, what was really critical was our commitment to communication between the two of us. I know he held back a lot on the things that scared him most because he was not one to burden other people. We did have countless hard conversations, and that was important to have a safe space to be honest. And the reminders that we were not angry at each other, but the circumstances. Yeah. I thankfully had joined a gym right before, 6 months before he was diagnosed. And that place was through and through. They were cheerleaders for me and would call me if I didn't show up. And so health and fitness were really important, to even just have a space to throw a punch and be angry at something. Our church community, equally important. And Dual Boot really has been a lifeline. They gave space for conversation. They were incredibly patient with my travel schedule. I'm very thankful to be able to work remotely. And I was able to maintain my job and still am through this journey of caretaking. And I don't think it would be possible with any other team. I've been there 4 years and he was sick for 2.5. So they've seen every bit of it. Funny enough, I actually came off of medication when I was on it for the first year. Okay. And then came off last year. And I was actually with my doctor last week, and he said, "Why did you make that choice?" And I said, "You know why? Because pride goeth before the fall." I was determined that I was going to do it the right way and be strong enough to handle it without any support. No idea why those thoughts came in my head, other than just like, I have to control something because everything is out of control. And that certainly is not the case now in the space of grief. I have recognized that there is no weakness in being surrounded by people who love you. If anything, I think it takes courage to open up that I am not okay, that our home is very different, and that our children are brokenhearted, and it's easy in social media to see happy-go-lucky people moving through. But I love what someone shared with me yesterday. In grief, there is no moving on from that person. There's learning to live without that person while you're still here. And I think that's the part for us that is going to take us a very long time to figure out.
On the medication thing, I want to go back to that for a second. Sometimes I feel like people go off of medication, or they don't want to use medication because they, in some subconscious way, they want to feel pain. Like, you
Mm.
can't take away the pain of the person that you love, and therefore there's kind of this like, I want to feel it too. And I don't know that that's necessarily kind of what was happening inside of your body, but I've heard that it's not a terribly uncommon thing to say, no, like, I want to feel all of this
Yeah.
because it's so intense. And you also know that and again, even these days, Parker, like, these days are fleeting. It's going to be hard for you to remember these moments
Mm-hmm.
only a month or two out from Thomas passing. So I just wanted to mention that. I did want to go back to something, and I know that this question might be hard to answer. What do you feel that Thomas feared? What were the things that scared him?
I know the answer to that because he told me his only fear, his exact words were closing his eyes on his family. He wanted to see his babies grow up. He worked so hard to build the family that healed parts of him, that gave him hope, that gave him joy. And our daughter, in his service, she shared some of her favorite memories, and one of them was when my daddy got sick and he still came to my dance recitals. He just showed up. And I think for him, those exact words, I'll never forget that. We were sitting in the living room. He was on his favorite brown recliner. And those were his words. And the visual of closing his eyes on his family, I think it's stuck with all of us really fiercely. What I've shared with our children, and what I personally believe is, from an eternal perspective, we'll be there to him in the blink of an eye. There is no concept of time when we're beyond this. And that's what I've shared often with our children, to give them some peace of mind to some extent. And maybe it's selfish in some ways to do so, but I think as human beings navigating grief, we do anything to survive the day. And I also think we get some doses of truth and, little moments that sustain, but
Yeah.
it's here that is so long. And I was grateful that he was not, at least what he shared with me, he was concerned about us being okay and, being able to kind of press on, but he didn't fear for us. And I'm grateful for that. I think that also came from a lot of the conversations that we had together, but certainly to be who he was, how loud he loved, and to have that cut so wildly short was hard for him to
Yeah.
grapple with.
Yeah. I've heard you say that in this new chapter, you are seeking, purpose in the pain. So part of my question for you is, what does that mean? And you've said so many quotes here. There's so many things I've written down as you've spoken. And sometimes I'm sitting here pondering, like, have you processed enough of all of this to, like, push forward? Because I think it's so easy for people in the early stages of grief to hold on to certain phrases, and you have to, right? To your point, like, you have to survive. And, like, have you accepted what has happened?
No, absolutely not. I'm on day 48. This is raw, very raw. And I actually don't think it hit me, the reality of it. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it waxes and wanes, right? But I was with a grief counselor last week, my third meeting, I think. My first meeting, I walked in and I said, "Hi, I would like a playbook on how to move this along faster, because I'm a slightly productive human and I'm unable to find any level of productivity whatsoever. So if you could give me a play-by-play and some sort of 5-step strategy on how to get through this more quickly, that'd be great. And I think she probably looked at me like I had 3 heads. And she reminded me that it was not going to go quickly. There has been an unbelievable amount of paperwork. I had no idea.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is that it is a massive distraction from grief. However, there are parts of the paperwork process, as she said last week, where it is definitive that that person is not coming back. I told my father-in-law last week that I keep waiting for Thomas to walk through the front door. And I was afraid that I couldn't remember his voice the other day. Thankfully, I have many voicemails. And so there are some moments where the further away I get from this, the more afraid I become, because right now I'm still closer to life with him. And if I get the chance to live a long life, it will likely be the case that I might have more time without him than I had with him. That is a very challenging reality with which I am grappling. However, the piece that I'm reminded, a fellow widow, which that word still, I'm like, that word is not, that's not me.
Yeah.
But it is, reminded me that we have to stay detached from any fears of what the future might look like. I think that one piece I'm learning is that when you go through any traumatic experience, for me, it's starting to ready my body for the next one, as though I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. So getting back to the original point of your question, I actually think right now I'm more moving between a fight or flight stage consistently. The grief counselor reminded me that my nervous system is very likely whacked out from 2.5 years of that, because I'm not sure, I had no idea until I was in it, the reality of caretaking. And ours really wasn't, I mean, it was a lot, but like my personal parts were more bandage changes and trying to make sure we had decent, clean food and that the kids were okay. So anyway, suffice to say, no, I have not accepted it at all. I don't actually know what that looks like. I don't know what it means. And frankly, I'm really afraid of the process to get there. When I talk about purpose and pain, I will say there are some times when people tell me to find purpose and pain that I have like a visceral reaction to that.
Yeah.
I just want to say, you come over here and live my life, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk through that. Hearing things like, you must be so happy he's not suffering now, that one can
Yeah.
be added to your reel of things to not say.
Well, hold on. I want to pause there. I think what people miss is that you're allowed to say those things, but other people should be very careful about saying those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference. I think like the person, if you're saying it, then people can agree and say yes and support that message. I think it's when it's coming from other people, it becomes very murky as to how that's going to be interpreted.
And this has been a series of lessons over here for me, because I am sure I have said a number of those things, for which I deeply apologize, now being on the receiving end. Presently, for me, purpose in this looks like the minute I find out anyone has been diagnosed with a type of sarcoma, and there are many, I want to do anything I can to connect that person with the right resources, the right physicians, the right research. I work in technology and have become deeply passionate about precision care through tech. Thomas actually did a fascinating clinical trial that we went through a lengthy process that's very expensive, and we fought insurance for a year. In fact, I think I'm still fighting on that one to get genetic testing on his specific tumor type to provide more precision care, which ultimately worked really well for him. He did a clinical trial with a team in Florida, and we had a list of effective medications within 14 days instead of the 16 to 20 weeks that it took for previous organization to do the kind of standard. Sarcoma does not play well with standard of care, and standard of care has not been changed in decades. So purpose to me looks like, and Thomas was so deeply committed to this, it's why he did 3 different clinical trials, paving the way for other people to have a different ending to their story than he did. I will admit, I said that early on, And I think it's important to also give space to the moments where that actually becomes really painful. A friend, very good friend, reached out 2 days ago with some news about CAR T cell therapy. And I was joyful and broken all at once because, of course, I want that for my husband. So I
Yeah.
think it's very, very important to know that we as human beings have a certain amount of capacity. And if you are in a day where that capacity is met, that's okay. We are not dishonoring our loved ones that we've lost by taking a step back to take a deep breath. We need to be able to do that to get through to the next day where we might have an opportunity to meet with a clinical research team, to go to DC and talk through really important funding efforts. That doesn't have to happen every day, all the time.
I also think what you're describing is, again, a common misnomer. I always say when people think of grief, they think of how they see it in the movies, where you can't get yourself out of bed, inconsolably crying, not eating, not functioning. And so much of what we've learned through support now is that there's really kind of two different types of grief. You have your under functioners, which is what I described, but then you have your over functioner. And Parker, you certainly fall into the latter of, because you have to keep going, and you're dropping your kids off at school, and you're working out, and you're going to the therapist, and you're working, and you're doing all these things. And I think what so often gets overlooked is that that doesn't mean you're not grieving. It doesn't mean that you are, quote, okay. It just means that you are processing in this moment differently than people might perceive grief to look like. And so to the supporters out there that might know someone like you, what would be your recommendation of how to still approach someone like this that, again, on the outside looks like they look good, they're pulling it together, but you're not really sure, but you still want to show compassion? What are some tips or guidance that you can give to that person so that they know that they're saying or doing the right things?
I love this question so much because I think it is incredibly easy, and understandably so, to assume that the overfunctioner is actually functioning in a healthy way and doing well.
Yeah.
In this house, we are not okay. And the overfunctioning is actually highly indicative of that. With overfunctioning comes very rapid burnout, minimal bandwidth, short spans of everything, and likely very little sleep. Just a side note. So my encouragement to people, if you see someone who, and I think it also worth mentioning, there are pieces of my life where I don't have an option, right? Like my kids are really small. They need additional support right now. Their minds are navigating things in a very different way than potentially a teenager, or, name 10 other seasons of life where grief is always going to be interpreted within our circumstances in our developmental stage, right? And so in some ways I consider myself very fortunate because I do have to get out of bed.
Right. They're a forcing function for you.
Yeah. That said, I will be really honest. In the very beginning, it was incredibly hard for me to do so. And still there are days where that remains the case. So as an encouragement to community stepping into the space of grief, a couple things that have been really important for us. One, do not ever assume that anyone is okay. Two, please do not ask, how can I help? What can I do? An over-functioning person is at full capacity. I have decision fatigue. I cannot come up with the list of things that need to be done. It's one of the reasons I am so grateful for support now. And thank you to Yuri for changing my air filters yesterday, things like that. I think it is well-meaning because you want to show up. What happens is unintentionally, you're putting the burden on the other person, the person in a space of loss and tremendous trauma, to come up with what they need in order to function. I have no idea what I need in order to function right now, to be quite honest with you. And what has been much more helpful are the texts that I get. I can think of one very dear friend who every week she sends me a text with 3 to 4 different options. Can I come on this day and do these 3 things? Do you need time alone? Can I come walk the dogs? Can I get just listing options? Pick one of these or none of these, no need to respond. As someone who's a recovering people pleaser, I also feel hyper vigilant to respond to every single inbound that I have, and that has been a very tough part of this process for me. I'm literally unable to keep up with it, and I therefore feel like even worse. So I think the other piece, I didn't know this happened, but when my sister was here for the first kind of week and a half, 2 weeks of this grueling journey, she was taking down my coffee order. I'm a massive local coffee only, really into it. It's a whole situation. Thomas made so much fun of me for it. She took down my coffee order at every single one of my favorite coffee shops in Wilmington. And I had friends who would just drop off one of my favorite coffees the first few weeks. Like twice a week, I would just open my door and there would be my favorite iced oat milk latte with honey and cinnamon from one of the 10 coffee shops in Wilmington that I love. It seems small, but that gesture of knowing that you are not alone, knowing that you're still in the arms of people who love you, I think it's real, right? Everyone has things going on. All of my friends have incredibly busy lives that are continuing to move forward. I have friends who've experienced loss since I lost Thomas.
Yeah.
And so the world will continue spinning, even though ours feels like it's stopped. I think that's the really hard part about figuring out how and when to show up for people. It's honestly a continuation and down the road, because I still walk into our closet every day and all of his things are still there. He is not here. And I'm waiting for him to come back. And so if people can show up in that void and that loneliness and longing, I do think I want to acknowledge it is hard to do and hard to figure out. But there is something spectacular about the bond developed in that. And I think the way that for us, the holes in our hearts are being, I wouldn't say patched permanently, but certainly filled as we recognize that the love we shared with Thomas and how he loved us was massive. And as such, there's so much more room for people to come in and fill that.
Parker, I could talk to you for hours about this. I really could. Don't be surprised when I come back to you in 6 months saying, I want to talk again, because I am so curious to see how your journey evolves. I'm so grateful just for the honesty and the transparency. I mean, you said it earlier, this happened 48 days ago. It happened effectively yesterday in the grand scheme of life. And I just want to make it clear to you, to be able to show up the way you have today is really impressive. Isn't the right word. It's inspiring to be able to hear you speak this way. You know, I wore Carolina blue intentionally today for you guys, which isn't hard for me because, as you know, I'm a diehard Tar Heel myself. There we go. But I wore this Carolina blue for him. And ironically, the way I want to end this podcast is not with the Tar Heelism. It's not a Dean Smith quote or a Roy Williams quote, but so much of what you said today actually reminds me of Jimmy Valvano's famous SB speech.
Thomas loved him so much.
Which I'm sure he did, because as I told you earlier, as I'm reading Thomas's obituary, I'm thinking to myself, man, I would have been so close with him. I feel so connected to him in the words you wrote in the obituary, or whomever helped you. But for those that aren't familiar with Jimmy V's famous SB speech, it's something I actually listen to it once every couple of weeks. I just find it to be very grounding. But Jimmy V, in his speech, he talks about how to live a Jimmy V day, you should spend your day with laughter and in tears and some thought, like some deep thought. And you have allowed me to have a Jimmy V day. And I wish you more days like this, where you can spend your days with laughter, with brought to tears, but also in thought. Because I think, as you have so beautifully articulated, it is feeling all of those things which is going to help you move forward. And I just want to say thank you again for sharing more about your person. And I'm deeply, deeply rooting for you and your whole family.
Thank you, Jordan.